Hello, everyone. This is Kevin Black from Black Market Leadership. And this podcast, I have to say that I am extraordinarily excited. This is a person who I've been wanting to talk to for years. My guest is Dr. Michael Shoyer, the former head of the Bin Laden tracking unit for the Central Intelligence Agency. Dr. Shoyer's analysis was so powerful, even Bin Laden recommended to the world that we read one of his books. Dr. Shoyer is also the architect of the CIA's rendition program. So to say that he is controversial is probably quite an understatement. In fact, he's very controversial. You might even say polarizing, given today's hot political climate. So I've done my best in this interview, and I think you'll see that I try to steer away from the hot political topics and just talk about the things which I have always been fascinated with in respect to Dr. Shoyer's work, and that's his mind, his analysis, his thinking. And I think for over the years, he has said the things which I think a lot of people are thinking, but just didn't say in public, such as our politicians don't understand the fight that we have against Al-Qaeda, or at least Islamic terrorism. Hence we have been in Afghanistan for over 20 years now. The ineptitude of our senior military leadership, which a lot of people don't talk about, and go on LinkedIn, and a lot of these generals today are championed or for some reason. Dr. Shoyer, I think, has really shown us some hard truths. And so in this conversation, the topic is thinking. And I would say, as you listen, focus on the four things I think are really stand out. And that is, one, the nature of the enemy. What is terrorism against the United States? And I think you'll notice that he doesn't mention terrorism. It's insurgency, which is a whole greater, bigger, more dangerous element against this country. The other thing is, look at the long-term impacts to this country of not fighting Islamic terrorism the correct way. The fact is, we are heavily in debt. We live in a surveillance society. And I think you could say this is really due to our unnecessarily long war against these Islamic terrorist groups and factions. The other thing is, look at his view of looking at reality as it is, not as we want it to be. One thing that he is known for is reading and appreciating the words of our enemies. He actually took them seriously. And the other thing is, I would say, if you notice one thing about him, notice that he's very pro-American. He thinks that, hey, he works for the United States. He's not a global citizen. He's not there to work for the Europeans. That he's been hired by the U.S. The American taxpayers expect a return on investment on their defense, and he was there to make sure that we got it. So with that, whether or not you agree with some of his analysis, that's fine, but I hope you enjoy this and get a perspective, which I think is sorely missed today. So with that, let's go. Let's start my conversation with Dr. Michael Shoyer.
This is Black Market Leadership, the underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers.
Welcome to Black Market Leadership, people. Oh, Lord. I got to tell you, I am extraordinarily excited today. Black Market Leadership, the one thing that I really want to make this company as an underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers. And if you were to ask me, Kevin, is there one disruptor that you want to talk to? I'd be like, yes, Dr. Michael Shoyer. Without a doubt, Dr. Michael Shoyer. And guess who we have as a guest on Black Market Leadership? Dr. Michael Shoyer, welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Black. I'm delighted to be with you. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
Please call me Kevin. Let's keep Kevin. It informal.
Well, keep me Mike then.
All right. So for the audience, I'm going to read off a little bit of your bio for the audience. It's just an amazing bio. So Dr. Michael Shoyer is 22-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency. Is that correct?
Just short 23.
Just short 23. He was the chief of the Bin Laden Station. That was the tracking unit at the Counterterrorism Center known as Alex Station from 96 to 99. He also served as a special advisor to the chief of Alex Station from 01 to 04. He is a New York Times bestselling author with books such as Through Our Enemy's Eyes, Imperial Hubris, Why the West is Losing the War on Terror. That's a 2004. Marching Toward Hell, America and Islam After Iraq, and just a fantastic biography on Osama. It's called Osama Bin Laden. Dr. Shoyer is an expert in global terrorism, so much so that even Bin Laden mentioned his name to the world, really in regards to his accuracy of his analysis. Dr. Shoyer is also a blogger and a podcast host on the Two Mics, which I understand is just really taking off. So congratulations, Dr. Shoyer.
Thank you, sir. It's I guess there's some people who are interested in hearing two elderly guys chit-chat about current events and the future of the Republic. And we have some very good guests. My partner, Colonel Mike, in this has got some, he's pretty much a kind of a fellow of the world. And we have some pretty good guests. And yes, we're very pleased with it, very surprised with it.
I've listened to many of them, and I always enjoy when General McInerney comes on. Boy, it's some really interesting stuff that you guys talk about.
We just talked to him today, and that one should be up tomorrow or late tomorrow, I think. He had a lot to say today, too. He's a very nice man. I've known him much of my career, and he's a man of high quality.
So on a personal note for the audience, I was introduced to Mike Shoyer, if I can. I was introduced to Michael Shoyer's book, Imperial Hubris, Why the West is Losing the War on Terror. I was in Korea. This is 2004, and I went to the library to get some books, and I found it. I read it, and I was just blown away. And from that book, I have been following your career. I have watched, I think I've told you before, I have watched many of your YouTube interviews. I think one of my two favorites, though, one is Conversations with History. That was at Berkeley, which you and I have discussed before, a fantastic video, which I showed to my American military history course. And all the students, nearly all of them always say, thank you for showing this. They had no clue that kind of perspective even existed today. So that video, Conversations with History, which I highly recommend the audience check out. And my other favorite was your interview on the Bill Maher show. What year was that?
It was an interesting thing for me because he's in California and I was here in a studio in Washington, and I could hear him, but I couldn't see him. And so we had our conversation, and we got to have a little discussion about Israel. And he kind of looked toward me as if I was a Israel first guy, that whatever they do is okay, and we've got to support them to the death. And I basically said, no, that's not the case. And as I recall, the interview ended shortly thereafter, and I didn't think any more of it because I couldn't see what was going on. And I went back to the car that came to get me, and my I think it was a BlackBerry at that time, was buzzing like crazy, and there's people coming in and saying, Mike, he looked like you punched him in the gut. And I guess every once in a while I run into it on the internet, so I guess it's still up there, getting a look at now and then.
I've taught a course to executives on how to argue, and I always show that video, always, because because there was a line you said, which, again, to me, it was just so profound. He had mentioned, that nations have a right. No. He mentioned that, our ally is the only democracy in the Middle East. And you said, so what? It doesn't matter to Americans if anyone ever votes again. And it looked like you had punched him because he had no comeback to that. And in fact, when you can see him processing, and he's thinking, and finally he goes, it would matter to me, So,
well, yeah. I always tell people, I in my career, I was paid to protect Americans and American institutions to the best extent I could with the assets I had at hand. And I really didn't care about what the Washington Post was going to say, or what, if we had a failed operation. I think the majority of Americans would have said, try again. And so I've always been, I don't think it's being really just a hard ass or something like that. It's just, I saw my role, and still do, as in terms of serving the Republic, not serving another country, a certain kind of philosophy of government, nothing. And it boils down to casualties and things. I think that's not to protect Americans because you were afraid you'd kill too many of the enemy is kind of a butt backwards way of thinking.
Totally agree. And you work for Americans. Who are the shareholders? They're Americans, and you have to protect them. And to me, you were speaking truth to power. And no matter how uncomfortable people can be at that, I think the words were profound. And boy, yeah, when you said that to him, you could tell no one has ever said that. Actually, had that succinct retort, and it was great. It was great. It's for the book. So
you're very kind.
If you want to learn how to argue people, make sure you watch Dr. Shoyer on the Bill Maher show years ago. So Dr. Shoyer, look, again, on your podcast, you have done many podcasts. You have your own podcast, and you're always talking about politics, domestic or foreign. And I thought we'd do something different because, look, again, I've read your books, I've watched your videos, and the fact is that your ideas, your observation, really your analysis, specifically in fighting Islamic terrorism, to me is just truly unique. And I think it's unique to just a lot of people. And I say unique in the sense that it's not overly complicated. In fact, it's common sense. And I really think that people are overcomplicating things which shouldn't be overcomplicated. And that's why I wanted to talk to you in respect to thinking. Really, I would call the art of thinking. I'd like to really cover with you some lessons that I usually work with executives, with leaders. And there's some truths I have found, whether it's business or the military, I have found that I think they're universal. And I would actually like to go over someone with you and maybe get your feedback on them and in respect to your experiences with Al-Qaeda, with tracking down Bin Laden. Can we do that?
If you'd like to, I'd be happy to give it a go. I'm not much of a deep thinker, but I will certainly answer your questions the best I can.
You're too modest, sir. You're too modest. So let me ask you this. What is your educational background?
Well, I have the good fortune of having gone to a small Catholic college in Buffalo called Canisius. I got a very good education in common sense, and a very good education in terms of learning the importance of analogy. Not to the extent that the analogy blinds you to some things that are not transferable over the centuries or over the millennia, but to know what hasn't worked in the past and what has. And so I did a master's degree there. I went up the road to Niagara Falls in New York and went to another, this was a Franciscan college, and did a degree in American history, a master's degree at Niagara University. And then I couldn't afford to go to school in the United States. I couldn't find a university that was anywhere near my means. So I went to Canada. I went to the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. At that time, they had a socialist government, or what passes then for a socialist government in Canada, and they gave the same rate to domestic people and to foreign scholars, or foreign students rather. And so I did a PhD there, and then I was in a position of I needed to get a little money for travel and research, and because I was an American there. And the level went up to the federal government in Canada, they wouldn't give me any money. And because I was attending a Canadian university, I couldn't get any money from people here in the United States, organizations that do that. And so I went to Ottawa to a place called Carleton University, and I did a master's degree in British Empire, and I completed my doctoral thesis when I was there. So I had kind of a checkered international, or at least North American education. But it got the job done. I can't figure to this day any other way to have done it.
It's funny you mentioned that because I remember you. I think was it referred to the White Dominions?
Yes, that's what my field was, the so-called White Dominions, which of course included South Africa at the time, from 1855 to the end of the interwar period, 1939.
To me, when I think about your background, I wouldn't say it's multidisciplinary, but the fact that you're not just studying the United Kingdom, but or not United Kingdom, but you're studying the mainland surrounded by satellites, and to me that sounds like almost that really prepped you for focusing on Islamic terrorism, considering how spread out it is. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I think in some ways it is fair to say. But the other thing, I didn't come to work for the agency until I was 29. So I had what turned out to be a great gift, but during the time I didn't realize it. I worked for Union Carbide in a factory where we made gas separation plants. I was a rigger and a crane operator and a lift truck operator. And I learned to get along with very many different people from different races and learned how they thought and how they reacted to me or I reacted to them. And I think that that's one of the main things that prepares you for doing the work I did, in that you have to listen to the person who's talking to you, whether it's a friend or an enemy. And you have to take it in the first instance until it's proved otherwise to be him or her telling you the truth. And the most wonderful thing about the Islamists, if I can say such a thing, is that they, especially Bin Laden, but his senior lieutenants also, were explicit in what they intended to do, why they intended to do it, and why, no matter how long it took, if we kept doing the things they found offensive, they would resist, kind of to the last man and the last bullet. So I tend to think that the spread out problem is a physical manifestation of the problem, but the real problem for the Americans is that no one in this town, in Washington, in tremendous spectrum of the academy, paid any attention to what he said. And frankly, over the course of my working full time on it through the books and through the agency, I bet 75% of the things he said he tried to do or did, which compared to any American politician is extraordinary.
Astronomical.
Yes.
You know, it's funny. As you were saying this, one of the lessons I had on here is I found that we call it inductive learning. You know, inductive learning, not deductive, as just taking some slogan or some idea and just accepting it, but inductive learning from the ground up. And the one thing that I have just really admired about your work in your interviews is that, you know, when you speak, you don't speak like an academic. You don't take 10 minutes to tell me, you know, something that you could have done in 10 seconds. But I remember I remember one example that I was thoroughly impressed with, really. And it was, you were talking about the spread of Islamic terrorism. And you said, pull out a map and look at 2001. Where is Al Qaeda at? They're in Afghanistan. And look at, you know, let's say it's 2014, look at all the other countries are spread. Just look at it. And to me, that is a straightforward, common sense, easy to grasp. But the point is, you reduce that to something so simple. And to me, only someone that actually has experience on the ground, who knows people, who actually understands to communicate. You need people to understand you, to actually listen. So, yeah. Well,
I think that's a fair statement, sir. It is. But it was kind of a grand tour after I resigned, and really in the last years when I worked at the agency, it was a grand tour of talking to people who thought the enemy didn't have a voice in what we were doing, and could not possibly comprehend two other things. One, that we weren't virginal and gracious, and that our foreign policy obviously benefited everyone. And second, that a radical Muslim, could have a common sense approach to the war he was waging, and really didn't want to fight us. You know, his enemies were Israel and the Arab tyrannies, and he's fighting us to get what he thought was the reason that the Arabs for so long couldn't budge Israel and their own tyrannies, which is to defeat us. And he had a series of statements, a series of arguments that clearly won vast support in the Muslim world about our support for Israel, about our support for the Saudis and Mubarak, about our military presence in the Holy Land, and things like that would appeal to a Muslim if he was in Quebec or if he was in Malaysia. If
I remember right, I I was just fascinated with this. You made a point of saying that I think Al Qaeda's center of gravity. In fact, I think you quoted Clausewitz, but their center of gravity was our foreign policy, which
absolutely it was.
Yeah,
I said at one point, and I got a lot of flack for it, that if Osama had been a Christian, our foreign policy was the Christmas present, and he never thought his dad would give him. Because we could not have played a better part. We were the premier imperial patsy of all time.
And for the audience here, when we talk about center of gravity, that's the one central crux that connects all the other pieces. It's almost like it's a spark plug to the engine. You take that one piece out, and the whole engine's just ineffective. And so when you say the center of gravity was our foreign policy, I remember you talking before about how just disparate the Islamic community was, but it was Bin Laden who was able to really unite them to say, hey, look at the Americans, look, our presence on the Arabian Peninsula, our all these other factors which they have listed. So it was really that ability to our foreign policy actually help him connect all these disparate fighting peoples.
He certainly did that, and it was a funny thing to watch here, because as you tried to explain that to somebody at your level or higher who really didn't want to hear it, they never picked up on the fact that the world was one of the reasons it worked so well is because we gave the world with other countries tremendous communication systems. And Osama bin Laden could speak to anyone in the world, not always to the rank and file, but if there was a cleric there anywhere, a mullah, he would be able to speak at least some Arabic and be able to translate it to his flock. And but I couldn't budge him. I have to say to this day. And I think I took a little pleasure in the last presidency, because they smashed up ISIS, but they didn't kill them. I think they took a little bit too much satisfaction in what they did. But it's just right now, the center of gravity that we just spoke about is being rebuilt by Biden. What Trump did was to get us out of the way. Our absence in their region won't make the heart grow fonder, but it allows them to direct their activities against their main enemies, Israel, the Saudis, the Gulf tyrants, whatever it is. And I think the lack of terrorist attacks during Trump's presidency was an example of them looking around and seeing, well, he is getting out of Iraq, he is getting out of Afghanistan. And Syria, they played a part, and now they're going, and that was the way for us to win that war. If we absolutely refused to win it militarily, which we could have done too, but the idea is to deny the enemy of a center of gravity.
If I remember correctly, I think one of the I hate using this pop culture term. One of the kryptonite to their center of gravity, at least during Bin Laden, was the perception of takfirism. That if he was perceived as a takfir, that could really wreck his coalition. Is that
absolutely,
correct?
Sir? That's exactly correct. And of course, it wasn't true. And if it had been, for example, the Saudis or the Kuwaitis or Mubarak or al-Assad, the old man or the son, would have killed him, because there's no thirst in the world for takfirism, which was demonstrated to some extent by the animosity of the Arabs toward a lot of what the Islamic State was up to. But Bin Laden was hardly, after he was killed, the national interest asked me to write an essay for them. And I ended it by saying, one day we're going to regret the fact that we didn't somehow find a way to allow Bin Laden to do what he needed to do and get us out of the way. And sure enough, if Al Qaeda was a nightmare, the ISIS was worse.
How big of a threat was not threat, but was ISIS just a huge detriment to Al Qaeda?
It was a function of, it was an easy thing for them to surpass Al Qaeda because of their relentless lack of caring about human beings. Bin Laden, from the day I first started to read what he wrote, which his first publications were in the 80s, until I read his diary that they found in the town where he was killed. His main concern in terms of creating a situation where Al-Qaeda could prosper and do what they thought was needed for the Muslim world was to avoid killing Muslims unnecessarily. And in one of his final diary entries in the first week of May of, 2011, he's having a discussion with one of his senior lieutenants, and they're putting together a memorandum to say, listen, we've got to take advantage of these spring, what they call it, the Arab Spring. And what we've got to do is support the people who oppose the tyrants, but we can't kill people unless we're attacked. And he was especially focused on Egypt because Egypt was so explosive, and so the Muslim Brotherhood had so much pent up anger over 50 years from trying to avoid violence as much as they could. And that was his major concern just days before he died. So and it was apparent in his published writings. It was something you would have realized if you had read it. And if you knew anything about takfirism, he wasn't it, but you would have thought, geez, bin Laden's better than what could come next if it is takfirism.
You know, you mentioned, I guess, almost in the comparison between ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that Al-Qaeda really had a defensive strategy where it looks like ISIS had an offensive strategy.
Yeah, it was another big attractor of attention for bin Laden was to make sure that he wasn't being perceived as, or he wasn't presenting the image of himself being the new Mahdi or the new, what the heck, Sultan, the guy that was the head of all Muslims around the world. That was something that he wanted to avoid at all costs for two reasons. First, people would have said in the Muslim world, they could have attacked him and said, well, he's only in it for his own gain. He wants to be the new Saladin or something like that. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, there's two kinds of jihad in the Quran. One is one led by a person who is recognized as the leader of all Muslims around the world. And that's an offensive called an offensive jihad. And it's the responsibility of people to support that man and to join his armies, but only to the extent that when the leader says, we have enough people, we don't need any more, then everybody else can stay home and go about their business and support, the economy that's supporting the war. And in a defensive war, it's everybody's responsibility. And it's everybody's responsibility because the enemy is on the ground in Muslim territory. And it worked very well for bin Laden. It was really a grassroots war. We've seen it for Al-Qaeda, at least in the kind of people that came to Afghanistan. Everyone from rich children, children of rich parents, youngsters of rich parents, to very poor people. And it was, in my mind, it was a mark of genius. He was not an arrogant man, and I think he was a gifted man in recognizing how the world worked and how he could take advantage of what he couldn't change.
You know, one of the things that I've always been interested in, the factors which shape people. That's their history, their experiences, their belief systems. And, you know, you've described bin Laden. I'm really curious because I don't think a lot of the public knows this. How did the Soviet-Afghan war, how did that experience shape him strategizing and fighting against the United States?
Well, it shaped him, I think, in several ways. And the first one is it's a good example of his own view of himself. He went there and they offered him a command of a unit, and he said, "No, I can't. I don't know anything about this." And initially, he was someone who helped with logistics, and then he became a machine gun, part of a machine gun crew. And eventually he worked his way up to being in command of a small unit. But he saw a cause that was I wouldn't say perfect, but was almost ideal to work around with his ideas of a defensive jihad. They had a Muslim country in Afghanistan. They had an invasion of non-Arabs, non-Muslims, but not only that, of atheists. And he learned how to manipulate that portrait of the enemy to the advantage of the Afghans, certainly, and the few numbers of Arabs who went there. And I think that became the main learning experience. And the other thing is the Afghans will fight any foreigner, and morale, war weariness. They suffer from all those things as we do. But as long as they haven't won, it's because they believe their God had not yet permitted it, but would in the future. So that's how it shaped him. I think it also shaped him from being a member of the wealthiest non-royal family in Saudi Arabia. It really brought him down to be able to live with very little, to sleep in the outside and in the rainstorms and in the snowstorms and all of that. It toughened him, if you will. And I think that was a very important part of what we saw after 9/11.
One thing that I think of is when when the Soviets leave, I hope I'm not wrong on this. The Soviet army was not decisively defeated. It was not annihilated. It was really bled to death. And it was almost a war of attrition. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand. That I know, and I've seen again in your interviews. There was one on CNN. I'm trying to remember who was that. The ex-mayor with the hookers. I can't remember him. He was talking about. I can't remember his name, but he was debating you about Bin Laden being, was he really victorious or was successful in the end? And he was saying, he said, no, absolutely not. Elliot Spitzer, that's who it was.
Yes.
Yeah, he was not. He was saying the fact that they have not attacked us means that he failed. But my point is, when you look at the Afghan war, they didn't decisively defeat the Red Army or the Soviets. They bled them. It was really a war of attrition. And I really wonder if that experience that really influenced how he's attacking us, because you said before that his goal was to defeat the United States, not necessarily militarily, but even economically. Is that correct?
Any way they could do it. Yeah. Economically, he certainly saw the wars in Afghanistan and then in Iraq. Iraq was another gift for them, as debilitating because of the expense of supporting those wars with taxes or by borrowing. He's a clever economist too, but also he knew how risk averse, and especially how casualty averse we were. And so the idea was the same with the Soviets, although I think he was surprised, and most people were surprised with how much impact dead and wounded Soviet soldiers coming back from Afghanistan had on the final decision by Gorbachev to get out. This is a good example of historical, how to think about something. Because I'm sort of a pedant, I first went to work on Afghanistan in December of 1985, just before my Christmas leave. And so when I started to work on it, I got as many books as I could of firsthand experience of war in Afghanistan. And there was a couple by one of the Greek writers who was with Alexander. And there was an enormous number of firsthand memoirs by British officers from the 1840s war and the 1880s war and the 2019 wars in Afghanistan. And every one of them showed directly how anyone who thinks that history doesn't repeat itself is a fool. And if he can't be persuaded to at least consider it, he's an idiot. Because what happened to us in Afghanistan, what happened to the Soviets in Afghanistan, the British in Afghanistan, the Mughals in Afghanistan, Alexander in Afghanistan, was the same. The culture is such that it's divided tremendously and is stratified every way. and they fight each other, not with as much lethality as people claim. They would kill their sister or something for a Chevrolet. Nowhere near that extent. But that mass of divided people into tribes and clans and in families, the only time they've ever been united is by foreign invaders, and that their unity lasts until the foreigners are gone, or until they're confident that the foreigners are leaving. So, in many ways, we've never had an easier foreign policy issue on our plate than Afghanistan, and we were never prepared for one more so than this one, because the agency, for example, had people who had worked on Afghanistan for 12 and 15 years. They give up promotions when the Soviets were there to stay and work on it, because it was just a once in a lifetime experience. But none of that was used. None of it was used. There was no war plan for Afghanistan at the Pentagon. We had numerous officers come through from the lieutenant colonel to the brigadier level for briefings. None of them had read the Soviet General Staff's after action report, which was available in English, where they said they underestimated the power of Islam, the determination of people to resist them, the idea that casualties were considered bad by the Mujahideen, but they were never going to stop fighting because their daughters were killed or their brother was killed. But we suffered so much from not reviewing what history had to say, and what it said very specifically from Alexander till today. If you're going to go into Afghanistan, the only way to do it is with a punitive expedition that would go in and out in 12 or 15 months, destroy all the infrastructure you could find, and as many people that needed to be killed, kill them, and then get out. And you wouldn't have beaten them, but you would have like smacking a Labrador with a newspaper on the nose. He'll behave himself for a while.
Right.
And you might have to do it again. But the last thing on earth that will ever work in Afghanistan is to try to establish a central government of any kind, even if it was a Muslim government. History has repeatedly shown, again, from today back to Alexander, one of the things that the Afghans consider a foreign actor in their country is a central government, because it denies the tribes and the clans and the families and the chiefs and everything else the ability to govern their own territory. I'm sorry to rattle on like that, but I get very frustrated with people who you can make a bad analogy, but really analogy is just saying what has worked in the past and what hasn't, and is what worked in the past something we can duplicate or at least use as a model. And certainly, if something hasn't worked in the past, we've proven that, Alexander, I don't know how Alexander communicated, but we had 21st century communication systems and we still couldn't win.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile